Yeah. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We have one motion to begin. I would like a motion to approve an MOA with the NCTA. Mr. Cannon.
I move to approve the MOA with the NCTA for sick leave donations as recommended by the superintendent of schools.
Thank you. In a second, Mrs. Albert, any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. I'd like a motion to approve entering into an open session of the Budget Committee. Mrs. Nardolillo, and a second, Mr. Chavo, and all in favor? Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to budget season. And I'd like to introduce Mrs. Nardolillo, who is our budget chair for a change. There's stability in that position. And Ms. Nardolillo.
Okay, thank you. And we would, as a board, we would like to welcome all of you to tonight's meeting. I would just ask that if you do have questions throughout the meeting, if you just identify yourself. I know some people are new here and we may not know you on a name basis, so we would like to get to know you. So with that, I'll turn things over to Ms. Gills and we'll begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Nardolillo. Thank you. And I hope this is working. Good. Okay. Welcome everyone. This is our first meeting of our budget season. And I want to start too by thanking everyone who is here tonight. This is a commitment of your time, but this is an important process, and having an opportunity to share our thinking and get feedback from the community is really important to all of us. So thank you to those of you who are here as parents. I'm not sure that when you get home, your child is going to say, thank you so much for going and devoting your time. So on behalf of all of them and all the other children in North Colony, thank you for giving us your time tonight. We really appreciate it. I want to start with, if you are at home watching and we are live streaming, if you have questions at home, you can email our communications office at communications@ncolony.org. DJ Jacala from our communications office is here. She'll be monitoring all night and she will be giving us any of the questions that come up throughout the evening. For those of you who are here, our typical practice is we go through different portions. Then we answer first questions from the Board of Education. And then if there are questions from the community, they come after those questions from the Board of Education. So as we get ready to go tonight, we are working with new microphones. So I am very much a person who likes to stand and move around. So I am trying very hard to stay seated and talk into the microphone, but that is already proving a challenge for me. I may have to take this out because I like to move. But for our budget context, our budget is always rooted in our mission. Our mission is why we exist, what we try to do to serve our children and their families. We have three main pillars that guide us, and we'll talk a little bit about those. We are also talking tonight at the beginning about education in what is now moving to a post-pandemic world. Our world has seen a significant change locally, in the state, in the nation, internationally, and it certainly has also impacted our schools, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We will talk tonight about enhanced federal and state aid. If you have been watching the news, you know that there is significant aid coming from the state to schools across New York State, which is fantastic. I do want to remind people that for North Colony, we were one of the last districts to get fully funded with our foundation aid. So although we are getting a great increase in foundation aid, this is money that has been owed to us for many years now. So it is great to finally become whole. And so we'll be talking about that. And then we will be talking about fiscal responsibility. We are committed to excellence and we are committed to doing it in a fiscally sensible way. As you know, our goal is always to sustain and grow our programs and opportunities for children, but we also have to be mindful of the economic conditions in the state. And right now, we know that inflation is an issue, and you'll be hearing about that through our budget. as it may be for your home, many things cost you more now than it did a year ago. And that is true for the school too. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that. So if you are new or if you don't remember from a year ago, we always start with our mission statement. And our mission statement to me, both parts start with the word all. We are a fully inclusive district, and our goal is always to provide every child with an opportunity and also the support that they need to be successful in our schools. And that looks different for each and every child. And our goal should be to provide the support that each child needs in whatever way they need it to be successful so that they can grow. And grow doesn't just mean a test score. Test scores matter, and being academically challenged matters, but it also means, and certainly post-pandemic, it means social growth and development. We know that it's been a couple of difficult years for students and families, and we're still finding our way out of the pandemic. Relatedly, we want to also support all our teachers and administrators. We work together. We are a collaborative team. I may be the one speaking tonight, but I'm certainly not doing this work alone. There's a tremendous team who works together, and we give it our all to provide the best education we can for each and every student that is of high quality and is relevant. And the world is changing. So what is relevant today wasn't relevant 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And we need to ever be mindful of what is coming, what the expectations are in our current society. Ooh, this is being really persnickety tonight. We have three major pillars that we always talk about when we think about our mission statement. We talk about academic excellence. We are here so students can learn and grow academically, but also equity. That something I said earlier, all students are provided with a framework of necessary support. Equity means that students get the support that they need. It doesn't look the same for each and every child. And then social emotional health and well-being. That was a pillar that we had before the pandemic. It's something we always talked about, but it is certainly something that really comes to the front of all our minds as we return from the pandemic and we work with our students and our families. So each year we talk about, well, what's the context this particular year for academic excellence? Certainly during the shutdown years of the pandemic, we had different thoughts about academic excellence than we had before the pandemic. Certainly thinking about social emotional health as we've come back from the pandemic, as I've said, that's become a major pillar for us to continue to think about. And what I want us to think about, and I've asked all our administrators to think about it, is this really guiding question. If we really mean all in our mission statement, we really have to think about, as we come out of this pandemic in a district like North Colony, which has a supportive community and an incredibly dedicated faculty and staff and board of education, we want to do more than make sure kids just graduate from high school. That should be like the lowest thing we want to achieve, is that kids graduate from high school. What we really want for all of our students is that sometime during your K-12 opportunity, you find the place where something you can be really passionate about. This is something I love. This is something I'm good at. This is something where there are other students who have the same interests as I do. This is where I can build a peer group. This is how I can contribute meaningfully in the world. We really want our students to feel that school isn't just somewhere you go, you sit there for 8 hours, you get your grades, you collect your credits so that you can walk across the stage and get a diploma. And that's always been part of this district's mission, but I think it's more important now than ever as our world is changing really rapidly. So we're asking the question, what would it take if we were really committed to helping all students find and pursue their passions? So what does that mean to offer them the kinds of different opportunities that this may not be my thing? I always say, I love poetry. That's not going to be every kid's thing. That's okay. Can we find something that's going to connect you to school where you really feel passionate and you feel like this makes sense to me? This is what I'm good at. Can we then give them the knowledge and the skills that they need and the opportunities to pursue those passions? And then most importantly, show them how their unique talents and gifts can contribute meaningfully to our society. Every child comes to us with unique talents and gifts, and it is our job to nurture those hearts and minds. It is our job to help those children grow into young adults who really recognize that they have value and they have something to offer. And that looks a little different in a post-pandemic world. After a couple of years, especially with the older kids who are learning at home and online and introduced to a whole different kind of way of relating to people. You know, I just read a survey that said over 60% of 13 to 19-year-olds would rather text with a friend or communicate via gaming than actually talk to a friend in person. And depending on the age of your child, you may have seen that. That's a pretty lonely world. So we really have to grapple with what will it take to help our students to be successful. It's a really exciting time, though, to be doing this work. Right now, you may know that the state has a blue ribbon commission on graduation requirements. They are due to come out with their guidelines by the end of this school year. Now, those won't take effect right away. If you have a 10th or an 11th grader, they're not going to change the rules for graduation in the middle. It'll probably be phased in with cohorts. So a certain group of ninth graders, it'll start. But when we ask this question, one of the things we want this budget and future budgets to be able to do is to have North Colony poised that when those opportunities open up, and we expect that they will open up different pathways and different ways for kids to show their knowledge and experience, that we are ready to go, that we've had time thinking about it together with our community, with our business community, with our educators to say, how can we be best positioned so that this district can offer whatever the state is coming out with. We will always offer Regents exams in New York State. There's no doubt in my mind that those will stay. And that is absolutely fine. And we will always offer college classes in the high school, and that is absolutely fine. And all of those pieces, but if we go back to what does each child need? For the kids for whom that is working, that's terrific. We're going to continue to offer that. But if we have other pathways that we can open up to have kids be more invested, to feel a part of something, to really find these talents, that's our work. And it starts with this year's budget. So that's very exciting. A little bit of a preview of what we'll get into later as we move on. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to Mr. Who. I'm going to bring him this very handy dandy. I'm not going to throw it because anyone who's seen me throw it knows why I'm not going to throw it. He will go over some budget facts with you and give you the context now for the budget from a financial point of view.
Good evening, everyone. So let's jump in with a few budget facts just to frame where the revenues come from in our school district budget. So we're at about 67% of revenues coming from property taxes, about 25% coming from state aid, and the balance of about 8% coming from other various revenues, including fund balance and reserves. So North Colony is considered a low needs district. And that's why you would see property taxes being in a higher percentage than you would state aid. That's what you would expect to see for any district statewide in such category. Interesting, though, when I look back last year and the year before, as Ms. Skeels mentioned, the state is fully funding foundation aid. It's been many, many, many years that has not occurred. So the formula has been allowed to run. And we're now entering the third and final year in 23-24 of the state fully catching up with funding all districts statewide with what their foundation aid should be. So having said that, I look back a couple of years and you can see because foundation aid is now being fully funded, the percentages are shifting a little bit. So a couple of years ago, property taxes were about 75% of the budget, while state aid was about 18%. So you can see how state aid is, the foundation aid fully funding is influencing the shares of the overall revenue budget. And we're coming to the close of the significant federal funding that came into play for all school districts during COVID. That was about $9.3 million for North Colony. And we're getting near the end of that, of those grant periods. There we go. So the governor put out her executive budget late January, and education aid is at historic funding levels. It was increased approximately 10%. Total proposal of $3.1 billion. And of that, almost all of it is devoted to fully funding foundation aid, about 2.7 million of that 3.1. There is a $250 million high impact tutoring set aside aid that we'll talk in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. Expense-based aids are being allowed in her proposal to run as the law dictates. Those are aids such as BOCES, building aids, special education aids, and building aid. With the exception of building aid, what an expense-based aid is, if we spend $1 this year, that dollar gets put into a formula for North Colony and generates a revenue or an aid in the following school year. And we'll look at those numbers later on as well. The governor's proposal increases pre-K funding again for another year by about $160 million. And the governor's proposal puts in place a couple of new reporting requirements. One has to do with pre-K, which seems to make some sense given the significant funding that has been provided over the last couple of years that the state wants to gather information in regard to pre-K students and how schools are utilizing the funding. Another proposal has to do with zero emission vehicles, school buses in particular. The governor proposed mandates regarding zero emission vehicles. And we'll look at that in greater detail as well. But she also proposed this year reporting requirements. Again, I would presume it is done to gather information to see how schools are coming along and meeting the mandate, and potentially even analyzing are the dates established in the regulations realistic for everyone to meet those dates. So we've talked a lot about foundation aid and fully funding, and just to recap what's taken place over the last 3 years. So year one was the 21-22 school year, and that provided North Colony about $3.2 million of the total that was due. And then in year two, they upped the funding level to about 80% of the amount due. That resulted in about $6.3 million of increased foundation aid. Now we're in the final year, up to 100% of foundation aid fully funding formula. And that's going to generate just shy of $8 million in the 23-24 school year. Now you might ask, if year two jumped up by 20% and generated 6.3, why did year three that jumped up another 20% generate almost $8 million? That's really almost exclusively a function of inflation, because inflation is a factor in the foundation aid formulas. And that's why I think you see such a large share of the overall funding of $3.1 million or $3.1 billion rather statewide. Almost all of it is devoted to fully funding foundation aid. And as a footnote here, we'll talk again about this high impact tutoring aid set aside that was part of the governor's proposal. And for us, that's a significant amount. It's about $863,000. And noted that there's a formula attached to that. So it took 11.77% of your total foundation aid in excess of the 3%. And why 3% is because anybody that was not due additional foundation aid in terms of a catch-up, 3% was the floor that districts would receive. Sure.
So the set aside that is proposed in the executive budget, as you saw for us, that is $863,000, so almost $900,000. It has very specific rules associated with it. So it is specifically for high impact tutoring, still not fully defined, for students in grades 3 through 8 only, in English language arts and mathematics only. The 3 through 8 has to be twice a week, at least 30 minutes a session. It can be before school or after school. It can be provided during the school day, but it has to supplement what students are already getting. So it cannot be anything that we already have. So we can't just say like, oh, okay, well, we have a great summer program. That's additional support for students in grade 3 through 8. Let's use some of that money for our summer program. It can't be. It has to be something newly designed that has this twice a week, no less than 30 minutes. Very hard to do it during the school day because you don't want to pull a student out for tutoring because then they're missing instruction in the first place and their schedules are very full. So that becomes a very complicated situation to figure out. You also want to think about for students, do they want to have a longer day? Do they want to come in earlier or stay after? The district gets to decide who is considered for this by students that we identify as not meeting grade level standards in grades 3 through 8. We set all the entrance criteria, we set the exit criteria, and by the district, I mean not the state. So there are no guidelines coming from that. That is all internal, and it has to supplement, and that's a big piece. It cannot supplant. So we cannot just say, we'll use it for this or we'll use it for that. And so thinking about who the tutors are, it is a 1 year set aside only. This becomes very complicated because right now, there is a shortage of teachers. And although we tend to not have that issue in North Colony, it is harder if you're trying to get a teacher for a 1 year position when there may be permanent positions elsewhere. So to try to hire enough people to act as tutors for 1 year only, and then what happens after that? That's a big cost to absorb into the budget. So we are still waiting more guidelines from New York State. We are keeping it as a set aside and we shall see where it ends up in the final budget.
So a little bit more in regard to zero emission buses and the reporting mandate. And what you'll see are some bullet points in regard to the types of information that will be collected annually. And the first bullet point has to do with the electrical grid. You know, if you call up National Grid and say, ask them how much power can you provide me without making modifications to their grid or to our facility, you know, how much power can we be certain of? The availability of charging stations and other components, progress in workforce training. Believe it or not, there is a little bit of a training component to driving a different type of bus. So there's bus driver training, there's mechanics working on totally different types of vehicles. So there's workforce training involved. Another data point is the number and proportion of buses purchased each year and what you anticipate to purchase in the next couple of years. And number and proportion of buses utilized by contractors because the mandate applies to the private contractors as well as the public schools. And lastly, the proportion of buses anticipated to be utilized by contractors in the next couple of years.
So this will be a very big topic, as you can well imagine, when we get to the transportation evening, and Denise Town, who's our transportation director, has been doing a tremendous amount of work to get the district ready. So we'll go into more detail as to what these mean, but these are just the reporting requirements. So when we do have our transportation night, you will learn a lot more about the zero emission bus mandate and what it means for North Colony specifically.
So the adopted state budget last year established the zero emission mandates. So no later than July 1 of 2027, all districts shall only purchase zero emission vehicles. And no later than July 1 of 2035, districts will only operate zero emission vehicles. That's unchanged from last year. The governor did not modify those dates in her executive budget. The state aid, and again, this was part of the adopted budget by New York State last year. The state aid formulas were changed for zero emission vehicles. Currently, when you buy a school bus, it is state aided over a 5-year period. EV buses in particular would be aided over 12 years. So as Ms. Skeels mentioned, we'll get into greater detail on this when we talk about transportation and the economics involved in executing these mandates. So let's look at the budget as per the executive budget. So the current year for state aid is about $21.6 million. And the governor's proposal in a fully funded formula for foundation aid would put it up to 29.6 million. And that includes the tutoring set aside. So that $863,000 is included in that 29.6 million. What follows are expenditure-driven aids that I mentioned earlier. BOCES, hardware and technology, software, library and textbooks, transportation, our 2 special education categories of public excess cost aid and private excess cost aid. And lastly, building aid. As the capital project is closing down nearly. The full state aid on all of the projects are kicking in. So we're up over $7 million in building aid for the current year and again for next year. And that should stay relatively flat over the duration of the bond for the project. So you can see that the expenditure-driven aids are fairly substantial, BOCES and transportation being the most notable other than building aid. And again, those are aids that are driven by current year spending that generate state aid in the following year. Lastly, down at the bottom, you'll see the UPK jumps all the way up to $1.5 million. And the phase-in of this, when this began 2 years ago, we had funding for 94 students. It jumped up to 237, and now 292 students could be funded with that 1.5 million.
UPK is another topic that we will hit on and talk about in much more detail later on throughout our budget presentations. UPK, that is a significant amount of aid. It also comes with significant challenges for us in the district. And so we will be devoting time on that subject later in the budget presentations as well.
Just to recap the significant federal funding that was provided during COVID. And there were 3 different sources. The initial CRSA Gear 2 provided about $629,000. And then the 2 significant grant funding sources came about Shortly thereafter, ESSER two or an ESSER three, $5 million and $3.6 million respectively, which brings us up to that $9.3 million total that we've utilized during those funding periods.
Again, tonight is really the preview. I feel like it's like the introduction to a book you're about to read. We're gonna spend a lot more time talking about this as well, because that is a significant amount of money. A lot of it we use for expenditures related to PPE, to increasing our ventilation systems, to improving that. But you'll also know, if you've been on the budget committee before, just been listening, we also brought in positions to help us with students. We added nurses, we added counselors. So all of those positions will need to become incorporated into the budget moving forward if we deem them to continue to be helpful, and certainly they are needed. So that will be part of our conversation about, as this money goes away, it's great that we're getting the enhanced foundation aid, because it will help to make that a bit of a softer landing, if you will, for that to become a part of our budget moving forward.
So let's take a look at the preliminary tax cap calculation for the district. And all districts are required to report their preliminary numbers to the comptroller's office by March 1st. They can be modified because there are various factors within each school district budget that could change and before the board actually adopts a budget, which could affect the tax cap formula. When we get to the end of the story and have a fully comprised budget, it may look exactly the same, or it may look slightly different depending on a couple of variables. But at this point in time, we start off with the CPI. That always drives what the maximum allowable adjustment factor can be. It's always a function of the CPI. It doesn't matter if the CPI is 20 or if it's 2, the max is always going to be 2. So it's almost 8% at the most recent comptroller's CPI index. And even though it's almost 8%, the way the law reads, it's capped at 2 regardless. It can be less than 2. And there have been many years, past years, where it has been less than 2. But regardless, 2 is the max. The other factor that can be a modifier to the tax cap are growth in taxable property values in a district. So the New York State Real Property Tax Division, they gather all that information from the assessors around the state, and they generate a percentage. And it doesn't mean that you're guaranteed a growth factor. It could be 0 for many. But in our case, for this upcoming year, it's 1.33%. And that's remained fairly constant over the last 5 or 6 years. It's always been right in that neighborhood. And then the other 2 areas that affect the calculation have to do with pilot agreements, if a district has pilot agreements. This district only has 4. It's not a sizable revenue, and it's not a material factor overall in the calculation, but it is a part of the calculation. And the other factor is a capital exclusion. What's contained in that is an allowance really to account for any significant differences year over year that a district may incur. For example, if you had 0 debt service, for example, last year, and you did a capital project and you took on $2 million of debt service, that $2 million hit that you take in your expenditure budget becomes a modifying factor in the formula. So it takes into account those big swings that could occur in establishing a tax levy. But in our case, fairly level. Neither of these amounts are really material in the overall calculation. We're just shy of $200,000 for our capital exclusion in this upcoming year. Doing so well. So here's what the calculation looks like, taking into account the factors that I just mentioned. You start with the current year tax levy. You modify it by your growth factor. That's 1.33%. And then you modify it further by the current year pilot payments minus whatever the capital exclusion calculation generates. That net number then has the CPI index applied to it, which in this case is 2%. And then you further modify by your upcoming pilot agreements and capital exclusions for the 23-24 school year. And it brings it down to a tax levy limit of $93.9 million. That doesn't mean it's the tax levy. It doesn't mean anything at this point, other than that's what the cap generates. And if a district was to exceed its cap, then it needs a 60% approval vote versus a 50% plus one.
I think before we go to the next slide, because there are new people here tonight and the tax levy, tax cap, the calculation can be challenging if it's your first time through it. Maybe Mrs. Gardella, we can start with questions on that part.
Absolutely.
So we can start if the board has any questions. I know that the board is well seasoned in this, but just in case.
And we do know this formula inside and out. But I do have a question. Why the 60%? When did that change? If we went above the tax levy
I
limit?
believe that's been in place as long as the tax cap's been in place.
I thought it was 51%.
No.
No?
Super majority, so.
Oh,
You need a super majority if you exceed the cap.
See, there you go. I guess I don't really know as much as I thought I did. Thank you. Any other questions?
We're limiting our questions to just the tax cap calculation right now, and we'll come back to other stuff later.
Thank you, Sam. Are there
Oh,
any
okay.
questions from the audience?
Okay.
Mr. Hu, you did a great job.
You did.
There you go.
Okay, so we like to bring context to kind of follow up with the tax cap and what all that means, and bring it to, what are the tax rates that the district has experienced over the last 5 years. And you can see how the tax rate on assessed back in 17-18 was 25.51 per thousand, and in the current year it's 26.63. And that's a 4.39% increase over that period of time, which results in a less than 1% or 0.88% per year over that period of time. And the full value tax rate is one in which it's meant to simulate the rate of a market value house. So if this taxing authority was at 100% value, those numbers would be exactly the same on both sides. But it's not. The town is not at 100% market value in their assessment methods. So when that is the case, the state then assigns what is known as an equalization rate, so that you can compare one district to another, if that's what you're trying to do, or at least see what the full value rate would be if the taxing authority did assess at a 100% value. And you can see in that case, that rate has actually gone down over that 5-year period. So the market values have increased at a much faster rate than what the tax levy has increased over that same period of time. So we wanted to talk about the tax exemption for volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers. This was not a proposal of the governor in the executive budget. This came about in December when there was an amendment made to real property tax law. There's no guidance coming from the state on this. The rules were put in place, and each taxing authority has the ability to enact this new exemption. So the way it in general terms, it provides a 10% exemption on a volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers' assessed value of their property. Now, there are some caveats attached to that and some rules on who they specifically apply to. And specifically to be eligible, the property must be owned by the volunteer firefighter ambulance worker. It must be their primary residence. It must be located within the jurisdiction served by the fire company, department, or ambulance service. And it must be certified by the authority having jurisdiction over the fire company, fire department, or ambulance service as being an enrolled member. So like any exemption, this is not quote unquote a cost or an expense to the district. Just like any exemption that is in play, it simply spreads the liability to all of the other properties in a district that is taxed, or a town or a county. So we have been discussing with South Colony and the town of Colony. It made sense given the number of volunteer fire companies that are in existence in the town. And we've had discussions about collectively coming to the same consensus, if you will, on what rules will apply, what options may be picked up, so that there is consistency within the town and each taxing authority. So we're looking forward to those conversations in the coming months to with anticipated action for the 2024 tax year.
And as Mr. Hoop said, we have been talking to the town of Colony since this came out, and South Colony. There were some very tight timelines, and as you can see and hear, we have about a little more than 1,200 volunteers who reside within the town of Colony. And so being able to go through and get this right and make sure that we are offering this to all the people who are eligible. The town has a lot of work to do around that, and the town supervisor is very committed to getting it right. We did not feel, and the town did not feel that they could get everything done by March 1st. So we're working through this. So it will be an action that the board can look at for the 2024 tax year. But there is a little work to be done with the town in order for us to get all the information so that we can, if the board chooses to enact it, that we can enact it correctly. We always let you know who your contacts in local government are. If you have any questions about the budget or the New York State budget, or you want to advocate for anything. So our assemblyman, remains Phil Steck, and he has been our assemblyman for a while. You have his contact information. And our senator now is Jacob Ashby, and his contact information is here. I'd like to say that Senator Ashby came out in the fall right after he was elected. He went to every school district that he now represents, which he had previously, sat with Mr. Corn with me for about an hour and listened to items of interest for the school district. We were also able to meet with Assemblyman Bill Steck, and then we had another meeting at Capitol Region BOCES with Assemblyman Steck and Senator Ashby, as well as all the other local assemblymen to talk about, and women, to talk about some of the issues that are facing schools and some of the things that we're trying to figure out in the budget as we move forward. And some of those we alluded to tonight. Understanding completely what the zero emission buses will mean for school districts, understanding completely what the pre-kindergarten aid will mean for districts. And so I would say that both of our contacts here have been very receptive, very open to listening to us, very much hearing from a district perspective what all the changes mean, and we are greatly appreciative of that. And so it will be next Monday, March 13th, where we will be talking about a number of things, that our facilities, our custodial and our transportation departments. That is where you will learn much more about the zero emission buses, and that is much more where you will hear about the planning that the district is already doing and will continue to do to meet that mandate, as well as debt service and interfund transfers. A week later, on the 20th, we're together again for instructional technology and equipment and the Smart Schools Bond Act. We still have some money left in that. We then move to the 29th for staffing, anticipated enrollment, and new programs and initiatives. So we have some information about our enrollment. Our enrollment continues to grow. We are now over 6,100 students in the district, and that impacts our budget. You know, we are one of the few districts in upstate New York that continues to grow. It is not a 1-year thing or a 2-year thing. If you've been in the district, you know we continue to grow each and every year. And so that certainly impacts our budgeting and our thinking. And then we move to April 3rd, where we will do an overall review of the entire proposed budget. At that point, we'll do the updated tax cap depending on decisions that are made, property tax report card, and then the approval of the schedules for the budget. The board will formally adopt that night. On May 3rd, a month later, we have a public forum on the budget, and we have meet the candidates night for the Board of Education. And then May 16th will be our budget vote. It will be held here at Goodrich from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So that is our overview, just to give everybody a little bit of context. We really like to start at a very much 10,000 foot level. We know we're digging into all this all the time, so we try to level the playing field at the first meeting, and then we'll start digging in each week and get far more specific on each of the topics that will impact our overall budget.
Okay. So with that, I believe the board might have some questions.
I'm sure I do.
How'd you know I was looking in your direction, Mr. Johnson? Well, while you're looking for your questions, how about over there? Any questions?
I don't have any questions
No.
right now. Our side seems to be
Oh,
happy as anything.
I did my time to say.
So a couple of questions about the high impact tutoring. Has to be reading and math. Does that count English language learners, or is that just ELA to native speakers?
No, it would count English.
So we can,
language.
because I know that's an area of growing concern. You mentioned difficulty in getting teachers. Is there value in looking for community volunteers, people who could step up for a year and provide that kind of that doesn't help us with spending the money because they'd be volunteers, but in terms of not hiring people that we then have to let go or find positions for, just something to maybe think about.
It possibly could, but again, that is almost $900,000. So thinking about how we're going to spend that in a way, and you know, my one hesitation would always be if we're talking about students who are have been identified by the district not at grade level standards, then I would want the most qualified people possible to
right.
be working with those students to try to close those gaps. So that's something we really have to work through.
Right. Okay.
I have a question related to that for the tutoring.
Mary, I think you need to speak into the
Oh, I'm
microphone.
sorry.
Apparently, you have to be very close.
Very close. All right. So my question about the tutoring piece is just that currently there's almost like an office hour model built in some of the schools. So I didn't know if, as far as addressing that, is it something that could be like built in or surrounding that office hour model, like as far as like supporting that?
I think we want to see more information that comes out of it, because certainly if it is a situation where we're going to, let's say at the middle school and we're going to have it after school, or at an elementary building, we're going to have it before school. And then therefore, we would want to be able to provide transportation to those students who have to either come in early or be able to go home after. So we really want to look at, will that cover our transportation costs? And we use some of that for that reason. It's possible you can do it on a weekend, but again, you want to think about kids and all their needs and what they want to do on a Saturday and what families want to do on Saturdays. So I think all of that we have to find a way to fold that in a way that will help the student and also not stigmatize the student, particularly by middle school. They have a real sense of who they are and where they fit in. So I think we want to be very thoughtful and intentional. So we are thinking about ideas as we continue to wait further guidance.
Okay, thank you.
I have 2 questions about the buses. Would you prefer that I wait and ask those next week when we talk about the buses?
I would say because of the
Yes.
amount of
They'll likely be answered.
that Denise
Okay.
has done, I think that would
Yes.
be best.
And then one final question about the federal aid. That's that 9.3 million number. Is that the total amount we have been given up until this point, including the past years, and so it's mostly spent? Or is that the amount we're looking to spend that remains?
That's the amount that will be spent in total through the end of this school year,
Okay, so we've already allocated a large majority of that.
all of it.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Thank you. That's it, Mary. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
I have a line item. I'm not sure if that's relevant or it may not be done.
Do you want him
Just
to have
thinking, because of the shortage of. I can,
Okay,
Okay.
no, I'm good, thanks.
he's good.
Yeah. So in case if the teacher shortage is a major issue, I'm not sure if there can be a partnership or collaboration with the local universities or the community colleges. Where you could probably ask for some of their faculty who could be part-time over there, or even the senior students who could be going for English as their major problem. Would be willing to collaborate with the schools.
So the question was about the high impact tutoring and have we thought about local colleges and universities, which we live in a very, very fortunate spot, surrounded by a lot of good universities and colleges. We have certainly used partnerships before. That is something that helped us out tremendously during COVID. We worked with Sienna and their nursing program to help run our clinics. We worked with their nursing program to help staff our health offices. People who were training to be nurses could be assistants and do paperwork and things like that. That is something we would look into. Our goal would always be if there was a way that we could, especially if it's before or after school, if there was a way that we could work with our teachers, pay our teachers, that would certainly be something we would want to do first. And then see if we could expand the pool if need be. But we have certainly used those college and university partnerships before, and we are well resourced in that area. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
So I'd add one.
Sure.
And it might be premature, so tell me if it is. The pre-K funding for 292. Do we have 292 slots, or is that still being worked on?
That is still being worked on. We could have slots. It is a question for us, as it is many districts of space for those.
Any other questions from our guests? So Mrs. Harrison, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hoot, and thank you, Mrs. Gills, and thank you, Mrs. Nardo. And thank you all for being here with us tonight. I'd like a motion to return to special session and adjourn. Mr. Johnson,
So moved.
all right, a second, Mrs. Nardolillo, and all in favor? All right, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If everyone can remember to turn their mics off and leave the batteries.